I have a problem with Mario Kart World. This issue has nothing to do with the driving, course design, or even intermission sections. My problem is this. When you try to drive backwards in time trials, Lakitu picks you up. Now, this is annoying for a multitude of reasons, but the primary one for me is because it kills my favorite challenge from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, trying to beat entire courses backwards. This was incredibly fun. I loved finding creative ways of getting past obstacles, and attempts at beating courses in this way led to the discovery of a lot of the major glitches in 8 Deluxe. However, with these Lakitu changes, doing this in Mario Kart World was simply not possible. But the thing is, that's not entirely true. You see, when the game checks to determine if you're beating the course backwards, it doesn't actually care about which direction you're going. All that the game looks at is whether you're facing forwards or not. And the pickup doesn't happen immediately. There's a few seconds of grace period beforehand, and this can be reset by simply turning around enough that Lakitu goes away. So if you repeat this process over and over again, it's actually completely possible to move the wrong way without Lakitu bothering you at all. So then, this begs the question, with these limitations, how many courses can you complete backwards? Well, a lot of tracks in this game, like Mario Bros. Circuit, are essentially one continuous path without any obstacles. All of the tracks that are structured like this can be beaten fairly easily, but the remaining 17 are a bit more difficult. I decided to try to complete these in the order that they appear in Grand Prix, so first up was Crown City. Now, there's a pretty glaring issue with beating this one backwards. Unlike a typical track where you complete 3 laps that all loop back into each other, Crown City's laps are simply segments cut out of one big path, which means that it's not possible to beat this one backwards by simply reversing from the starting line. My solution to this is to simply beat the course like normal and then start going backwards from the end. For Crown City, the first half of lap 3 is fairly simple, but then we get to this stretch of highway. To continue from here, we somehow have to make it all the way up to this glider panel at the top of the building. I figured that I would try just driving out of bounds under it in the hopes that Lakitu would put me up on the platform when I respawned. However, upon trying this, I was dropped off in the middle of the gliding section rather than before it. I tried circling around while in the glider, but I just couldn't quite turn sharp enough to make this work. I also attempted to wall ride to get higher when approaching it, but it was pretty clear that this wasn't going to work. So with no ideas left for getting past this, I decided to move on to DK Spaceport. Like Crown City, this course is a section track, so after making it all the way through, I turned around and began. At the end of this straightaway, there's a gap that we need to cross to make it up to the ramp on the other side. Luckily, the Lakitu respawns in this section are very generous, so with a large jump, I was able to get dropped off at the top. For the next few straightaway sections, it was just basic driving, before we arrive at another gap that can be solved in exactly the same way as the first. For the next barrier, I didn't even notice it at first, because what looks like a continuation of the road is actually out of bounds, with the correct path being this ramp above. Conveniently, all you have to do to make it up to the top is just drive along the bottom road, and Lakitu will bring you up after you've gone far enough. From there, all that's left is the gap in the first segment, which strangely has a glider panel that's facing backwards. This allows us to easily clear the gap and finish the rest of the course. Next was Shy Guy Bazaar. This one's main obstacle is this gap at the gliding section. I tried a few things here, like charge jumping over this railing and wall riding off of here, but nothing was really working. I moved on to Airship Fortress, which has a very similar situation to Shy Guy Bazaar. The glider panel on this one is below us, which seems like it should help, but this gap is still gigantic, so after trying a few things, I gave up and continued on. Starview Peak has a fairly large gap right before the finish line, but I did have an idea to get past it. If I could make it to one of these walls, I might be able to wall ride off of them, giving me more height and a better chance at a good Lakitu respawn. I tried charge jumping while using a mushroom and got really close. However, after a few more attempts, I was still getting picked up by Lakitu a bit before the wall. I tried changing my Kart combo to one with a higher speed stat, but this honestly seemed like it made it worse. I tried going in the opposite direction and getting as low of a speed stat as I could, but this didn't help either. My last idea to reach this was leapfrogging off of this rail to get a bit more height, but Lakitu picked me up as soon as I touched it. So for the 4th time in a row, a gliding section had stopped me from beating the track. Luckily, Sky High Sundae was up next, and its gliding section seemed a lot more possible to get past than the others. But first, we have to beat the rest of the track backwards. The first obstacle we arrive at is this rail raised road after the bumpy section. This looks impossible to get up to, but luckily we can simply drive into the tunnel below to get picked up by Lakitu and dropped off on top. After this, we have yet another raised section. The part we're on here extends far enough to the right to allow me to wall ride off of the ice and jump up on top. I did fall off here, but luckily we're far enough back that Lakitu dropped me off in the right place. Immediately after this, there's a slightly raised gap that we have to get across. It's small enough that I thought a charge jump might work here, but I wasn't able to get high enough and Lakitu dropped me back off where I was before. I tried jumping to the side of it with the exact same result. I needed some way to get more distance. But then I had an idea. What if I fell off the blue part into a wall ride and then tricked off of it to launch myself far enough? I got lined up at an angle where Lakitu somehow wasn't mad at me for trying to go backwards and tried it. I wasn't able to make it onto the platform, but I got far enough that Lakitu dropped me off in a good spot. Next up, there's a large gap that you usually glide through, but luckily there are walls in this section, so I was able to wall ride off of the pink one to make it to the platform in the middle. And from there, we have a boost panel facing backwards, which makes it easy to do yet another wall ride before getting dropped off on the top road. For this next jump, I wasn't able to get Lakitu to pick me up when I fell in front of it, but jumping around worked. And then I reached the course's major gliding section. There were a few different ways that I could approach this, but I decided to go with the simplest first and went up the rail before running out of time halfway and getting picked up. Lakitu dropped me off in midair, but there were some drivable places in front of me that I thought might be reachable from this point, so I decided to rewind back to the spot where Lakitu picked me up and try to make it over to here. While I rewinded, I held my control stick to the right and held down on the hop button in the hopes that it would allow me to glider trick as soon as possible. But when I got back to the respawn point, something strange happened. Instead of performing a midair trick, my cart did a small turn to the right before continuing to glide like normal. This struck me as slightly odd. I had never seen a cart do this before, so I decided to rewind again to see if it was repeatable. But when I reached the respawn point again, instead of setting me back in the correct direction, the game simply pulled me straight backwards before doing another small turn to the right, making me rotate even farther than before. I tried this again, which resulted in an even harder turn to the right. For some reason, the game wasn't properly checking which direction I was facing when I rewound back to the respawn point, and the small turn to the right was allowing me to essentially spin my cart while staying in one spot. I immediately realized that if I could chain this together for long enough, I could go straight backwards through gliding sections, meaning that every single track that had been impossible due to one of these was back in contention. I was able to finish Sky High Sunday by using this rail, and then went back to give Crown City one more try. I made it back to the gliding section and got picked up by Lakitu. I started doing the turning trick and slowly turned around. It wasn't fully consistent. Sometimes the game would just randomly pull me back towards a forward-facing position, but I was able to gradually get myself turned mostly around. And when I was happy with my direction, I stopped using the turning trick and just glided straight backwards. And after respawning, I was dropped off before the glider panel. This trick had just proved itself and allowed me to overcome a previously unpassable barrier. I decided that this glitch deserved its own name at this point, so after a bit of consideration, I landed on calling it Rewind Stall Turning, or RST for short. Despite this victory, Crown City was far from complete. Immediately after this, the track has a gap with the other side raised significantly. Luckily, there's a wall just to the side that I was able to trick off of to get up. After this, I needed a way to get up to the road that goes through the tire trophy. I tried charge jumping off of here, but got brought back down to where I started. Wall riding didn't work either, no matter how high I got. After a while of trying this, I decided to beat the track like normal and get picked up by Lakitu in the trophy to see how far I would need to go backwards to get a good Lakitu pickup. But what I found shocked me. Even when you're on the complete opposite side of the tire, Lakitu still brings you down to the roof in front, meaning that if I was going to get past this, I needed to get up here without any Lakitu assistance whatsoever. I kept trying to jump off of this wall in slightly different ways, but I wasn't even getting close, so I decided to move on. We still have 3 more tracks to recheck due to gliders, so next up was Shy Guy Bazaar. After respawning into the glider, I began using RST, and after a few minutes, got to a good enough angle. This might not seem like it helps us, because the goal platform is still incredibly far away and above us. But here's the thing. We don't need to make it all the way in one go, because there are multiple points throughout the glider that you can respawn at. So all we have to do is repeatedly make it to the next one behind us until we've made it all the way to the other side. So after just a couple minutes of spinning, I had made it all the way across the gliding section backwards. Luckily, that was the only barrier on the track, meaning that this once impossible course was completable backwards. And next up was Airship Fortress. I jumped off the tower to get into the glider and began turning around. After about a minute, I was happy with my positioning and went for it. But my cart almost immediately started dropping out of the sky and I got picked up. This struck me as a bit odd, but I had made it further back, so I should just be able to repeat this, right? Well, as soon as I got set down by Lakitu, I started moving forwards incredibly quickly. Now, the reason for this is fairly obvious. This glider section has a cannon at the beginning of it, which is usually used for launching you across the gap when beating the course normally. But for some reason, even respawning in this area backwards causes the launch effect to occur. This doesn't immediately seem like an issue. I was still able to rewind and turn like normal. But when I tried gliding, I was sent flying backwards away from my goal. The launch was completely ignoring the direction I was facing and was simply throwing me back down the course in the regular direction. Which meant that in order to beat this course backwards, I would have to glide all the way from the respawn point before the one with the launch. I got back to here and tried again and again with the exact same result every time. The game was simply taking my glider away once I had flown a little bit, so with no ideas for getting past this, I just gave up and moved on to the final track I needed to retry, Starview Peak. I got into the first gliding section and began turning around. For some reason, this glider in particular felt very resistant to stall turning. I kept getting pulled more forwards and it was incredibly difficult to make progress. After a few minutes, I finally managed to get turned around enough to make it to the next point. From there, it became a bit easier, and after 2 more respawns, I had made it past. After the water area, there's another glider section. Luckily, this one is really short and I was able to get past it in one go. The final obstacle on this course is a wall with the next part of the road on top. I got up on the railing and jumped at the side of here, which allowed me to momentarily wall ride and get enough height to sneak onto the upper platform. There were no more barriers in my way after this point, so after a bit more driving, I crossed the finish line. Moving on to Faraway Oasis, the first obstacle you encounter is this raised boardwalk halfway through the course. Luckily, this one was really easy to get past. All I had to do was drive under it and get picked up by Lakitu. There's another gap right before the finish line, but this one was also possible to get by with a simple Lakitu respawn. Peach Stadium is up next. There are quite a few obstacles on this course, but none that are too large, so I was fairly optimistic. After a bit of driving, we get to this ledge. Strangely enough, I was able to solve this barrier by simply going into the pipe to trigger the Lakitu pickup I needed. And finally, there were 2 more gaps that I was able to get past with Lakitu respawns. On to the next course, Great Block Ruins. Right behind the finish line is the course's gigantic gliding section. This one functions somewhat like the cannon glider on Airship Fortress with the same speed lines and physics. Luckily, this seems like it only happens for a very short time at the start of the glider, so it might still be possible to get past regardless. I jumped off the ledge to get put into the glider and ended up back on the platform. My jump hadn't been super far, so I went for it again, using a mushroom, making sure to go as far as possible, with the exact same result. I needed to somehow get even farther than this to get a good Lakitu pickup. Simply brute forcing this with more and more jumps wasn't going to work. I needed some other way to clear this distance. I attempted to jump onto this platform, but unsurprisingly, Lakitu wasn't having it and brought me back. I tried wall riding on the side of it to avoid getting picked up, but this also failed. I kept trying different angles of leaving the platform until I jumped close to this pillar and tricked, which launched me really far. I immediately realized why this had happened. This structure was one of the ones that allows you to trick off of it, which gives you a surprising amount of both vertical and horizontal momentum, exactly what I needed to make it farther out over the ledge. I restarted the course to get my mushrooms back and got set up. I quickly turned around and immediately shroomed while charging a hop, released it, hit the pillar, and went flying significantly farther than any other attempt. But when I got picked up by Lakitu, I was once again sitting on the main platform with no glider. At this point, I was basically ready to give up. No matter what I tried, I just couldn't reach this unknown respawn point. I decided to give it one more shot off of the pillar on the left side because maybe this one would have a better respawn. And that's when this happened. After hitting the pillar, I had been launched into a cloud floating just above the platform that, for some reason, allowed me to briefly drive on it, giving me the extra boost I needed to get to a good respawn point. And now that I was finally in a glider, I could start crossing this gap. Things were going well for the first couple turnarounds, but once I got to here, the speed effect appeared. I turned around and tried gliding backwards to check if this had the same effect as the one on Airship Fortress, and getting thrown the wrong way immediately confirmed it. I gave it a few attempts from the point without the speed lines, and even though I was getting somewhat far, I would always get picked up by Lakitu. I went into camera mode to get a better view of the situation and instantly knew that I was doing this wrong. I had been holding back on the control stick because I figured I would need all the distance and height I could get, but upon seeing the problem from a different angle, I realized that I was way closer to the ramp than I initially thought, and my problem was now being so high up that Lakitu grabbed me. I needed to lose altitude as fast as possible if I was going to get to the ramp. I left photo mode and turned around before putting my cart into a steep dive. It looked like I was going to make it, but Lakitu intervened at the last second and put me back. But after only a minute of attempts, this happened.
Come on, come on, come on. Yes! Oh my gosh, I made it.
And after this was beaten, the rest of the course was going to be much easier. I tried jumping to this wall off of the pole, but I got picked up, so I just went straight back onto the cloud, which worked first try. For the next barrier, there's a rail connecting the lower part and the area I need to get up to. It starts in the off-road, but this isn't a problem if you simply hit the boost panel in front of it to get up to speed. After the chain, there's a cloud that allows you to bounce to the other side of the ledge, and a bit later in the same section, there's a gap with a convenient ramp to the side that allowed me to get up. From here, there's one last barrier that can be easily solved with this rail before you reach the finish line. With Great Block Ruins complete, it's time to move to the opposite side of the map to beat Boo Cinema. After a bit of driving, I got to the course's first obstacle, a small gliding section. I thought it might actually be possible to get past here without even having to go into a glider, because there's a boost panel facing the gap, but upon trying this, I did end up getting placed down just before the edge. Luckily, doing rewind stalling here was fairly easy, and I was able to get a full turnaround in about a minute. After a bit more driving, I reached this stretch with the conveyor belt. Since we're beating the course backwards, the conveyor belt works against us, and combined with the fact that I already need to turn around every few seconds, moving down this straightaway was incredibly slow. After about 30 seconds, I had made it to the other side and to the course's second obstacle, which I got past with the world's slowest charge jump. There was one more small jump that I easily got past before crossing the finish line and heading over to Bone Dry Burnout. The first issue I encountered on this track is this gliding section with lava at the bottom. I was expecting to have to do a glider turnaround in this section, but surprisingly, Lakitu just took me directly into the tunnel straight away. I continued my way backwards through the cave, but soon encountered yet another obstacle, this wall. This is way too high to get on top of with a wall ride, but maybe we don't even need to get up at this location. You see, there's an additional path on top of here that bypasses the wall entirely, so if we can get up to here at any point, we get past the barrier. I first tried to use this trick ramp, but upon hitting the wall, I quickly realized that I didn't have nearly as much height as I needed. My next spot was right here before the glider panel, because this wall is quite slanted. This didn't work because I couldn't even get a wall ride to start here. While I was down here, I had another idea. If I could get respawned in the glider, I might just be able to do a turnaround and make it up. I gave this a few tries, but never got respawned in a glider. I figured that there probably just wasn't even a respawn point here, so I moved on to my final idea. This other trick ramp on the left side, but it was here that I was having issues. No matter how much I adjusted my approach angle, I would always fall off right after I passed above here. It seemed like it was just hard-coded into the game to not let you wall ride past this point, which meant that we were gonna have to jump all the way to the white path from before here. I gave this a few tries, but I just couldn't quite get there. I needed some way to get extra speed during the jump, and the only way I could think of doing this was with a mushroom. Now, the problem with this is fairly obvious. Respawning after drowning in the lava gets rid of all of your items, meaning I don't have any mushrooms while I'm in the cave section. But what if we could get past here without getting picked up by Lakitu? Now, this probably seems insane on the surface level. This gap is gigantic. There's no way we could get over here in one jump. But the thing is, we don't have to. Using a mushroom while touching lava lets you drive on top of it temporarily, so if I was able to do this fast enough and turn around as soon as I made it to the other side, I might be able to cross here without Lakitu getting involved. I got set up and jumped off of the edge. It ran out by the time I reached the other side, but I had just enough speed to make it over and turn around just before Lakitu picked me up. But now I found myself with a new problem. I was stuck on this tiny piece of land right below the glider panel with no ways to get up here. I couldn't use my mushroom for obvious reasons, and this patch seemed way too small to get a charge jump without one. Regardless, this was my only option, so I began attempting to hop out of here. I just couldn't quite get up to speed fast enough to charge the jump before I hit the wall. After about 30 attempts though, I barely managed to jump in time and narrowly snuck up onto the top platform. I now had a mushroom in the cave, so I made my way back to the wall ride spot and started attempting it. I was getting a lot farther with the mushroom, but it still took me a few attempts before I was able to make it up. From here, I simply drove backwards all the way until the finish line, completing Bone Dry Burnout. Up next, Choco Mountain. For the cliff before the finish line, I tried wall riding off of here, before I realized that you can just get on top by respawning in the tunnel. The rest of the barriers on this track were equally simple, either being beaten by going around at the side or respawning in the mud. On Toad's factory, the first barrier is this raised tunnel I needed to somehow get into. I tried jumping up to it with a mushroom, but I wasn't even close. I also tried going off to the side of it to get picked up by Lakitu, but this didn't work either. Eventually, I discovered that if I just went below it and stayed facing backwards until Lakitu grabbed me, he would leave me on top. I moved on through the rest of the course fairly easily until I got to another raised ledge. I kept jumping at this concrete part in the hopes that getting over it would allow me to respawn at the very top, and after a few tries, I got high enough and it worked. And with no more barriers in my way, I beat the track. And with this one done, we now move on to the Special Cup. Our first race is Acorn Heights. For the most part, this track is fairly simple, but right at the end, we have this gliding section. I tried jumping off and began using RST, but when I got picked up after going backwards, I was back at the exact same place that I had started at. I gave it a few more tries with the exact same result every time. I wasn't moving backwards at all. I attempted to jump from this leaf to give myself a better initial respawn, but nothing changed. I didn't really want to move away from this track so quickly, but I couldn't see any other way to get past this, so it was on to Bowser's Castle. Right off the bat, we're met with the large gap we need to cross. The part of the road right before it is slanted upwards pretty sharply, so I was able to use it as a ramp to get over. Immediately after this, there's a gliding section. As soon as I started turning around though, I noticed that something was off. It was way harder than normal to get my cart to turn around. This seemed like it was due to the permanent speed boost you have in this section, but regardless, it was still possible to get a turnaround here, and after a few failures, I got a good respawn and continued heading backwards. In this floating platform section, there were two gaps that I was able to easily get over due to the backwards facing trick ramps. Next up is the vertical gliding section. This looks like it might pose a problem, but you can literally just jump down into the hole and fall down all the way. And with that, Bowser's Castle becomes yet another track that can be beaten backwards. And now it was on to the final course, Rainbow Road. This course has the most gliding sections out of any track in the game, so we were going to be turning around a lot. I started the course off by jumping into the gap before the starting line and began making my way backwards. This gliding section is one of the largest in the game, so it was taking a very long time to make it backwards through it. Luckily, doing RST here was easy, so after a couple minutes, I had made it back past the finish line hologram, and shortly after that, managed to make it all the way to the other side. I drove backwards through this area before encountering another gliding section. I jumped off the edge and got put fairly far up. The only problem was that doing RST here made the nose of my cart face straight downwards for some reason. I tried going backwards regardless, but got dropped off at the same location. I gave it a few more attempts before finally giving up and marking the track impossible. So with that, I had attempted to drive every course backwards in Mario Kart World and had only failed to complete 4 of them. The only 2 out of these that I could see may be happening are Acorn Heights and Airship Fortress, but even these would greatly surprise me. The Mario Kart backwards community still hasn't found the rewind stall turning glitch, so I'm about to dump 30 or so barrier solves on them as soon as I post this video. So to witness the chaos and maybe even solve a few barriers for yourself, join the Discord linked in the description. Also, if you want to help me continue making videos like this, consider buying a membership or even just subscribing, because doing either of these helps me out a ton. And thank you for watching.